You want to talk about a way to give away a game? The Detroit Lions gave you the perfect blueprint for doing it. They go into halftime up 24-7. At that point, you think about the record that Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers have in games that they have to play from behind, and you feel really confident that Detroit is pretty much a lock to punch their ticket to Super Bowl 58. But what happens? They get outscored 27-7 in the second half. This defense couldn't stop the 49ers offense to save their life. Their offense couldn't get anything going, especially on the ground. Detroit had over 130-something rushing yards in the first half. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, they were like sledgehammers every time they handed the football off to them. And then their defense was playing really well in the first half. You had the interception on Brock Purdy, which that resulted in you going up multiple possessions. You were able to get consistent pressure on them. You did a good job of balling up Christian McCaffrey. But what really changed the momentum of this game for me was when Detroit went for it on fourth down in the second half, and they got that key drop from their wide receiver, and then the 49ers offense took advantage of the short field that Detroit had gifted them for Dan Campbell's aggressiveness, and that's really when the 49ers started to get in rhythm. And I thought that Dan Campbell's fourth down decision-making wasn't an issue. Yeah, in hindsight, you look at the outcome of this game and you say, well, JT, if he would have just opted for the 2 field goals, the game would have been a lot different. He left 6 points off the board, and that is true. But I felt that Dan Campbell made a mistake opting to kick the field goal before halftime instead of not just going ahead and trying to play for the touchdown. Why would you just go ahead and play for the field goal in that situation instead of the touchdown? It's like, if you're going to be aggressive, go ahead and be aggressive before halftime, because you see, you got to have a feel for when you should go for it and when you shouldn't go for it. And at that moment, Detroit had all the momentum on their side offensively. I'm more convinced that they would have gotten that touchdown if they would have went for it on fourth down before halftime than they would have in the second half when they went for it the 2 times, because it just felt like it was forced. And anytime it feels like you're forced to go for it on fourth down just because you have to keep the momentum on your side versus taking advantage of the momentum that you currently do have on your side, that's when you find yourself failing in those fourth down situations more times than not. And that's what happened to Dan Campbell and Detroit in this game. And I don't think that the fourth down decision-making was bad. What killed Detroit and why they weren't able to have more success on fourth down was the execution. You had a big drop on the first fourth down attempt that you made in the second half. Then on the second fourth down attempt, Jared Goff, the offensive line just fell apart, and the 49ers pass rush got after him, so he had to get outside the pocket, throwing the run, and he threw the ball into the dirt. And what about the Jahmyr Gibbs fumble? Once Jahmyr fumbled the football, that was ball game for me, because all the momentum at that point had went to the 49ers sideline. You see, Dan Campbell, his decision-making is going to be criticized for the majority of the offseason, but you have to do what got you here. And what got Detroit in the NFC Championship, where nobody thought they would be a year ago from this point, is because of Dan Campbell rolling the dice and taking those risks. So you can't get mad at him for doing what has worked all year long. Yeah, it hurts that you weren't able to convert on those opportunities. And you could say that if he just would have kicked the field goal, he would have got the 6 points. But if he wasn't this aggressive, maybe Detroit isn't even playing in this game. So I'm not about to fault him for doing something that has worked for him all year long, that's got him up to this point. It's easy to criticize something when it doesn't work, but nobody thinks about when it did work and how much of a role it played for Detroit making it to the NFC Championship. The reason why the fourth downs backfired is because they didn't execute. You don't game plan for a wide receiver to have big drops. You don't. And there were a good amount of drops in this game by Detroit's wide receivers in the second half. The offense just was off. And this 49ers defense, they were teeing off. That pass rush was getting active. Nick Bosa had 2 big sacks. And I mean, even the run defense. Detroit was gashing San Francisco on the ground all night long in the first half. Anytime they went to the run game, they were getting chunk plays. But in the second half, I don't know if Steve Wilkes made some slight adjustments to the run fits that San Francisco had, but this just was a night and day difference with how San Fran played the run in the first half versus how they played in the second half. And when Detroit got pass heavy on the offense and they were moving the football and them not getting those field goals, it kept allowing the 49ers to stay in the game. And eventually when the 49ers got hot, that's when Detroit couldn't keep up. And when you play a team like San Francisco, and I was saying this to my friend that I was watching the game with, I was like, man, like they really should have attempted that touchdown before halftime, because if they would have went into halftime up 28-7, you feel way more confident about their ability to hold on to the league. Because with how Detroit's defense has played this season and how bad their secondary has been at times, there was no way I thought that they were going to be able to completely shut down San Francisco's offense in the second half. I was surprised that their defense even held them to 7 points at halftime. And with how their defense looked in the second half, that proved to be true. Dan Campbell, maybe you could argue that he should have been a little bit more aggressive in this game. Because when you know that your defense is starting to get a little bit tired, a little bit fatigued, and you got Christian McCaffrey who now is starting to get big body blows on your defense, you got to try to roll the dice. So it's understandable why Dan Campbell made those decisions, but you should have went for it before halftime and tried to go up 28-7 versus just being okay with going in at halftime 24-7. You were in proximity to get it. It would have been somewhat the equivalent to going for a 2-point conversion. It just made no sense to me to kick the field goal. If you're going to go up and you're going to be aggressive in the second half, you should keep that mentality for the whole entire game. You had the opportunity to get that touchdown before halftime, and it would have made this game so much differently. If you would have got that touchdown, and let's say you would have been in those 2 fourth-down situations in the second half, up 28-7, then you more likely would have took the field goal in that game, and that would have been 6 points. And you would have been up 34-7 maybe. And maybe just how you called the game or how your coordinators calls the game changes. But San Francisco is one of those teams that they got so much talent on offense. Your defense being able to slow them down and hold them to 7 points is something that kind of is a phenomaly. Because you know eventually they're going to get going. Brock Purdy is not just a great game manager. All right, in this game in the second half, he showed that he's an elite quarterback. He was making big runs in third down situations with his legs. He was making big throws over the middle of the field. Say what you want to say about Brock Purdy not being the most physically gifted quarterback, not having the strongest arm, but this dude came through in the biggest moments of the game for San Francisco, once again when they were down, like they did last week against the Green Bay Packers. And how Jimmy G used to play in the full quarter of ball games when San Francisco was down, you never would have trusted him in a spot like this. And that's what makes Brock Purdy a so much different quarterback than what Jimmy Garoppolo ever was. That's why he's better. You can actually trust him to win you a game like this when you're down multiple possessions. The reason why Kyle Shanahan doesn't have a lot of success playing from behind is because he never has had a quarterback who he can trust to throw him back into the game until he was gifted Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, he didn't have a super impressive box score or stat sheet in this game, but the throws that he made, like that big 51-yard prayer to Brandon Ayuk when it looked like it was going to be a pass interference penalty, it bounces off the defender, Brandon Ayuk catches it, and eventually it results in a touchdown. That was a great throw, but it was an even better play by Brandon Ayuk. Those are the kind of throws that Jimmy Garoppolo would have never made it in a spot like this. Jimmy G, the 49ers, when they had him as their starter in the playoffs in the past, you know what they did? They said that we want to run the football and only ask Jimmy G to throw the football when necessary. We want to put the ball in Jimmy Garoppolo's hands as the least amount of times as possible. That's not the same game plan with Brock Purdy. They actually trust this dude to win games. And that's because he's an actually good quarterback. He's not a game manager. He's not a quarterback that's carried by the talent around him. Every quarterback needs to have talent to succeed. Jared Goff was throwing to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, but which of these two quarterbacks look better in the fourth quarter? Was it Brock Purdy or was it Jared Goff? It was Brock Purdy. Chris McCaffrey had some big runs, but it's not like he was running all over the Lions defense all night. They had him pretty bottled up in the first half. And even in the second half, you know, every yard that Chris McCaffrey got, it's like he had to fight and claw for it. You know, the Detroit Lions had an incredible run this year. And I would even call them an underdog story. You think about the Lions and what was the perception about them before this past season started. Majority of people expected the Detroit Lions to be in the playoffs and possibly win the division. You just didn't know if they would go any further than the divisional round. They have a great future. All of their young players are fairly young. They dominated last year's draft. Hell, they've dominated their last two drafts. So they're set for the future. The only question is now, is Jared Goff going to be the guy that you keep around? You know, you going to lock him up long term, or you going to go to Hendon Hooker? Who knows? But with what the Lions have in place, you expect them to be in the NFC Championship picture for the next 3 to 4 years. This is just the beginning for the Detroit Lions. For Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, the pressure was all on them. You know, Detroit kind of was playing with house money. The 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, they had the expectation of being in the Super Bowl before the year even kicked off. And if Kyle Shanahan would have lost this game, this would have been a massive hit to his legacy, to his resume. Because you think of why the 49ers haven't won a championship with all the talent they have and with how much regard Kyle Shanahan is held at. You would think that they would have had at least 2 Super Bowls by now. But the reason for that is because they haven't had a quarterback who's been able to step up in the fourth quarter when they've needed to throw the ball to win games. Brock Purdy didn't throw for 400, 500 yards, but he threw the ball well enough that he was able to help San Francisco crawl out of a big hole. They were down 24-7. They didn't look good in the first half. Like, Detroit really kicked their ass. They really gave it to them. Straight up. And I was telling my friend, I was like, I don't know if the Lions are going to hold on to this, bro. Like, I'm not about to count out the 49ers. They're going to get rolling sooner rather than later. And every time the Lions were walking away with no points and they kept having those empty possessions, you kept on giving the San Francisco 49ers more chances to stay in the game. And eventually they got hot. The offense got rolling. And when Jahmyr Gibbs had that fumble, that's when Detroit lost all the momentum. And from that point forward, that's when the 49ers started to take this game by the throat. So the 49ers are going to their second Super Bowl under Kyle Shanahan. They're going to be playing against Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City once again. I'm really excited to see how the second game between these two franchises is going to play out.